You've learned a lot more about January 6th. You talked to hundreds of defendants. What have you learned?
Well, first I've learned about pain.
I believe in my nephew. I am proud of him. He was just larger than life.
We wanted to come and kind of just share what really happened today.
He had never been in trouble before in his life, so this was just so overwhelming. I was sitting in my home, and I got a call from his uncle.
What did he say?
They robbed him of his hope, his will to live. They took his fight away from him.
They broke him.
They completely broke him, and they broke his heart.
It's hard to find the truth these days, and it's needed now more than ever. We've traveled the country to bring you honest, accurate reporting.
Bottom line, Laura, if they didn't want people going to the Capitol, they didn't want people even getting close to the Capitol, it never would have happened. It happened because they wanted to happen.
No one was stopping you.
This is the government we're talking about, okay? Like they have like nukes and F-15s. They can do whatever they want to stop average people like me.
34-year-old Roseanne Boylan was one of 4 people killed.
This was a woman who got pushed down, smothered, trampled, and then beaten.
Had this been covered at all by anyone else in the media?
No.
They named me as one of the insurrectionists that was preventing the cops from rescuing her.
Was that true?
Absolutely not. This crutch was right at my feet, and I put it above my head, and I said, in the name of Jesus, Lord, please stop this.
Jeremy was at the Capitol providing security.
I mean, he's quite literally the poster boy for the Special Forces.
When you were arrested, they never sat you down and said, "Is this yours?"
No, because they're the same officers that recruited me on December 9th of 2020.
From Department of Homeland Security.
The same 2 guys.
These people are hiding all of this information, and judges have let them get away with that.
You could be here forever.
I will be here as long as the American people leave me here.
I'm Lara Logan with the rest of the story. Join us.
There you have it. Welcome to this special episode of the Trumpet Daily. We're here to have a nice discussion with our special guest, Lara Logan. Thank you for joining us on today's show. Tell us a little bit about your show.
Well, it's called The Rest of the Story with Lara Logan, and the first season focuses a lot on January 6th, mostly because I found that very little reporting was being done. There were some people out there like the Gateway Pundit,
right,
and the Epoch Times newspaper, and a number of other reporters who were doing their best.
Yeah.
But what we have a situation where one side has information dominance. And unfortunately, Republicans were as much as a part of the false narrative on January 6th as Democrats. So you don't even have, in a sense, you know, for conservatives who went there that day, for Republican voters, they didn't even have their own side on their side. And as a reporter, I'm always drawn to stories where we don't know the truth.
Right.
And so once I started to look into January 6th, I had felt guilty for quite some time because I knew there was a great miscarriage of justice that was unfolding. I mean, you only have to look up the definition of insurrection.
Right, right.
Really, to know that the whole thing was a lie. That doesn't mean people didn't get hurt. It doesn't mean there wasn't violence, but who was carrying out that violence?
Right.
Why were they doing it?
Yeah.
And was it organized in some form?
Right.
And so those are the questions that we tried to answer, but always with what I do, we looked at the stories that were just astonishing to us, like the Matthew Perna who killed himself while he was awaiting trial, Victoria White, who's beaten almost to death by police in the tunnel, Roseanne Boylan, who did die on January 6th, and what really happened to Roseanne Boylan. Why do most people in America not know her name? Everybody should know her name, and so on. So that's just the first series of the show, which is on X, and you can find it on truthandmedia.com as well.
On X, if they go to your Twitter page? Or?
Yes, you can find it on my Twitter page, and you can also find it on Truth and Media on Twitter.
Yeah.
And
you've had 3 episodes thus far. What would you say?
Actually, we've had 7.
Oh, well, I guess
7th one is out
January 6th.
Well, 3 parts on so what we had is the first 2 episodes were on Matthew Perna's story,
Right.
part 1 and part 2. The second 2 episodes were on the Brunson brothers,
case, yep.
right? So that was 4 episodes. And then the 3 that you're talking about
Right.
is that we've had 3 parts
Yep.
on the Fedsurrection versus insurrection,
Right.
which has had a lot on Ray Epps, but is not just about Ray Epps.
What would you say of those 3 have been the biggest revelations to you as a reporter?
Well, one thing is that, so as a journalist, I believe very strongly that we have a responsibility to understand the whole story. And a lot of journalists don't like to do that. One, because if you've got a daily deadline, you just don't have time. Others, quite frankly, are lazy. Others just don't even think about it, right? They take a clip or something that's going around, that see it everywhere. Oh, it's on New York Times, or it's on Washington Post, so therefore they just take it at face value. And you'd be astonished at how few reporters sit down, like I sat down with that footage of Ray Epps the night before January 6th, telling people you must go into the Capitol. And I was like, how did we get to that point? Where did that conversation begin? And I went all the way back to the beginning of the live stream, and I watched it all the way through to the end. And so what I found was that Ray Epps was questioned by the January 6th committee about telling people to go into the Capitol. He was questioned by the FBI about that. But somehow, nobody questioned him about what he said later in the evening when he said, he whispered, we're here to storm the Capitol.
Yeah, it was brilliant the way you played that, but then you had the montage afterward, all the talking heads that used the exact same language.
Yes, because what's significant about that, if you understand information warfare, is that Ray Epps was using the language of the narrative, right? That was the narrative the next day, and still today it's the narrative that people stormed the Capitol. But yet he was using that language before it even happened.
Right.
So what does that tell you? Is that definitive proof? No, it's not definitive proof. But it is a strong indication when you have people saying the same thing, and when you have people saying it in advance of an event happening, that they know that that event is going to happen, that there's some degree of planning and manipulation behind it.
Right.
So that's what we're trying to uncover, because we live right now in the age of 5th generation warfare, which is defined as the war of narratives. So it doesn't matter what the truth is, because if the narrative prevails, the truth gets lost. And that's what they want you to do. They want you to give up on finding the truth. Give up on it. It's just much easier. Go along with the narrative. If you want to find the truth, guess what? You're going to lose your job. You might never get a job, right? And you're going to pay a heavy price. You might have the FBI coming after you. You might have people in your family that you care about that don't want anything to do with you anymore. You're going to lose friends. So just go along with the narrative.
Right.
Right? And what is the main infrastructure? What is the architecture of the narrative that keeps it up? So a false narrative is like a lie. It needs legs, right? You have to create legs. The truth doesn't need any legs. It's either true or it's not true, right? And it stands on its own. You can't take it down. You can't change it. You can't do anything to it. You can lie about it. You can misrepresent it. You can perceive it differently, but you can't change it. Whereas this false narrative, that's a lot of work. We got to keep that false narrative going, right? Which means we got to tell another lie and another lie and another lie. And then, by the way, those people that we got to tell lies, we got to keep them quiet, right? We got to give them enough incentive. So either through corruption, because then maybe we got a bad cop. Yeah, we got a dirty cop, and he's looking at the end of his career. Well, he's a good guy to do what we want done on January 6th, right? Or maybe we've got say someone who's been promoted into positions that they really have no business being in, but they were promoted for the wrong reasons, right? Like Yogananda Pittman, who was the head of intelligence for the Capitol Police. That woman was not qualified for that job, but she was anointed. And let's call it out. Let's call it what it is. She was anointed because she was black. And because we live in a time where putting people in those positions, making sure we have a black female in a position of power, that was what motivated the progression of Yogananda Pittman's career. So you got a woman like that who secretly knows she's got no business being there in the first place. And then what does she do on January 6th? She goes into the control room and she takes over the operation. So is it any wonder you've got police officers, by the way, most of them black, screaming into their radios, looking for direction, asking what the hell's going on, and they're getting nothing back? Because the person whose job is that's not her job, but she's sitting in that seat and no one dares say a word. They don't dare say a word because why? Because she's anointed, which means what? She's protected by some of the most powerful people in this country. So you really have a situation where both sides, in a sense, both police and protesters, were set up.
How many, you mentioned the Capitol Hill Police. We know about the informants and the FBI's involvement undercover. As far as the Capitol Hill Police, we were discussing this earlier this morning, but a lot of them did look like they were in the dark and set up, as you say. How many, though, were instigators? How many, there were the ones firing the flashbangs and all that looked like they were unprovoked at all. They just were firing it into the crowd.
So we don't know. That's the honest answer, right? January 6th was vast. You're talking about thousands, hundreds of thousands of protesters and thousands upon thousands of police. You've got different units. You have the Parks Police that had part of the jurisdiction. You had Capitol Police who have full jurisdiction over the Capitol. You had Metropolitan Police Department who were called in to assist. The government has acknowledged and admitted, they were forced to do this during the Proud Boys trial, to at least 13 Metropolitan Police Department undercover officers from the Special Narcotics Unit. You also have the Department of Homeland Security and Joint Terrorism Task Force. Nobody's asked them to admit how many people they had. And you said, we know about this. We don't know. We don't know what those FBI agents were doing. We don't know how many FBI agents were there. We don't know what those confidential human sources were doing. We know what some of them were doing because in individual court cases, and we're talking about hundreds of court cases, right? If you read the statement of offense or you read the indictments, you can find information that leads you to what information was passed on by which undercover officer or confidential informant. But that is an enormous undertaking. And some of it comes out during trial. So, you have a handful of people who've been there at every trial, but who's got the ability to do that? Right. Part of what is on the government side in this sense is the scale of it. Then on top of that, you've got documents that have been withheld from the public. You've got documents that have been withheld from senators and congressmen. Like you have, for example, the January 6th committee, the self-appointed, masters of the investigation, right? The documents they generated, the transcripts of interviews they carried out belong to the House. They have refused to hand over those documents to for example, the House subcommittee, on House Administration Subcommittee run by Congressman Barry Loudermilk, that's investigating that. It's taken them almost a year to figure out how many documents were passed by the January 6th committee to the White House, and some were passed to the Department of Homeland Security, and they refused to give them to the House itself. The House owns those documents. You don't have a right to give them to the White House and not give them to your own committee. And then the White House, under pressure, produced some of those documents, and I've seen photographs. They're so heavily redacted, you've got entire pages that are black. Right. And those were transcripts of interviews that were done with with White House personnel that were with Donald Trump on January 6th. And then the documents that were sent to Department of Homeland Security, which, by the way, have no business having those documents, those were transcripts of Secret Service agents who were with Donald Trump that day. So, and because for some extraordinary post 9/11 reason, the Secret Service now falls under DHS. Well, guess what? The House has requested those documents from DHS over and over and over. You know what DHS has said?
What's that?
Nothing. They've ignored them.
Surprise, surprise.
They're not even responding. So when you say to me, what do we know about, who is doing what? We know a tiny fraction of the truth. What we do see is you see some officers who are firing into the crowd that day, but these are low-level people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when you're down there on the line, you have your frontline officers. Behind them, you have, one step up, a more senior officer that's giving commands. And behind them, you have even more senior officers and another layer that goes back to the control center. So, I mean, I may be missing a layer or two, but essentially, you have layers of authority, all of which broke down. Why? Because right at the top, at the operations center, you had that woman, Yagananda Pittman, who was head of intelligence, who had no business running the operation that day. I don't even think Yagananda Pittman has spent 4.5 seconds doing any actual police work in her entire life. So what did she know about running the operations? You should have had the operations chief in that chair, but he wasn't in that chair. Right. And so you have it break down all the way down, and then you have officers on the line that are, giving orders. I don't know, this guy Glover from the Metropolitan Police Department. I mean, if I was in combat with a guy like that, he's screaming on the radio, honestly, like a person in a state of absolute panic. You're in the Special Operations Division of the Metropolitan Police Department, which faces violence on a daily basis. Some of the most hardened cops in this country. Okay, you protect the nation's capital, one of the most protected pieces of ground on the face of the earth. You've gone up against everything from, let's look at what they were doing in the wake of George Floyd's death, right? You've gone up against Antifa. You've gone up against, for goodness sake, these are the people that dealt with the civil rights movement. Every major movement of significance happens in Washington, D.C., and we're supposed to believe that the head of the Special Operations Division of the Metropolitan Police Department was running around like a little girl in a panic, screaming like a banshee. I've been in combat. Okay, I have spent many years in combat. I never once heard a low-level soldier, let alone a commander, screaming into a radio the way that guy was screaming. So for me, the red flag goes up, and I have to look into whether there is some theatrics there, right? Because these are experienced police officers, and all you need for chaos to ensue and for people to be set up is for some key people with placement and access to let them down. And they let down those police officers that day.
Our viewers are very familiar with Ashley Babbitt, obviously. You were telling us earlier today about Roseanne Boyland, and that's a story that hasn't gotten near as much coverage. Maybe you could get into some of the detail. Some of the things you told me I haven't even heard regarding her case.
So Roseanne Boyland's case is very interesting because she is actually the only person that died on January 6th in the tunnel that was really at the hands of the Capitol Police.
Now, where does this tunnel go?
So if you remember when you saw a lot of the footage on January 6th, right, there were two places where most of the violence was taking place. So one was down by the fountains on the West Plaza, right, on the west entrance to the Capitol. So people came down from the Ellipse, they walked down Pennsylvania Avenue, they got to the Peace Circle, and then there's that famous, now sort of infamous breach where Ray Epps is there and Ryan Samsel's the one who turns his bolt cap backwards, and they push through that line of officers there, and they keep going up, and they ultimately end up at the West Plaza where the fountains are, and that's where you have a long line of Capitol Police, and they try to hold that line for some time, and there's skirmishes in the front of that. But what happens is that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, once Trump finishes speaking, they head that way towards the Capitol. So you just get more and more and more and more people flooding the zone, right? And some of them break through that line and they go up the scaffolding, including, by the way, an undercover police officer who's in the last episode of my show saying, go, 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 come on, keep moving, go up there. And the scaffolding is all there for the inauguration, because this is where they build the stage for the inauguration. This is right before the inauguration is supposed to take place. So they climb up the scaffolding, and now you're on the next level. And on that level, there's some steps that go up into a tunnel that goes into the Capitol building. Well, I'm still trying to figure out what the real reason was that they defended that tunnel in such a determined fashion, because at that point, by the time the first rioters, the first people come up to those first barricades and break through that first barricade around 12:52. Trump is still speaking for another hour at that point, right? He's not even finished speaking. But by the time you get to that tunnel, it's after 2:00 in the afternoon, and the police are told to come and into the tunnel from the inside. When you look at some of the footage from the inside, they're told to stop people coming through because people have been coming through the tunnel. And so the tunnel gets filled from the inside with police. But from the outside, you have people trying to go through that tunnel. And for some strange reason, this absolute violent mess occurs at that point. I mean, literally, if the police had just stepped back and let people come into the building and then push them out, that wouldn't have happened. The window to the side of that tunnel is broken, and people going in and out of the Capitol right there. While that violence is happening, people are entering the Capitol right there. Now they'll tell you, well, the tunnel leads to this and it leads to that and it had to be protected. None of that makes any sense, because if you wanted to clear that tunnel, you could have just made an announcement. You could have said, this has been declared a riot. And the Capitol Hill buildings, what people forget, this is one of the most highly protected buildings on the face of the earth. It can survive chemical, radiological, biological, and nuclear attack. It is built to survive that. Okay, these are not ordinary security systems. You have loudspeakers that can reach every corner of the building and every corner of the grounds. Why were they not used? Why were they not used until it was dark, late in the evening, when all of this damage had taken place and police officers had been hurt and people like Roseanne Boyland had been killed? Why was it not used? Also, when I did that thing of following that footage right to the end, how did they clear that tunnel in the end? I wanted to know. Hours after Roseanne Boyland was dead, you know what they did? They had one guy with a simunition weapon, which is a different level of training. It's a different level of authority. The police let him come through. He opened fire with his simunition rifle. He cleared that tunnel in seconds.
Right.
People ran for their lives. They scattered. So there was absolutely zero reason to have pitched battles going on for hours at that tunnel entrance. And somehow Roseanne Boyland, who by the way was I'm giving something away here in our reporting, but Roseanne Boyland was a Democrat. Roseanne Boyland wasn't a Trump supporter before Trump came along. She wasn't a Republican. She was actually a funny, irreverent, lovely woman. And she was marching with BLM the summer before. And she went there to be a voice for people all across this country who were concerned about the election. She got forced into that tunnel. And when the police decided to force everybody out, those people couldn't move because there were squads of people that were pushing them from behind. And Roseanne Boyland was one of the people trapped. So was Philip Anderson. And so was Tommy Tatum. You know, they weren't the only ones, and they went down. They couldn't breathe under there. I mean, you can hear it and you can see it from the body cam footage that the officers had. You can hear people begging for help, literally begging for help. And when some of the protesters realized that Roseanne Boyland was dying, they pulled her body out and they're doing CPR on her, and this is all on film. And they're still being sprayed and gassed by the police. And so there were a number of people like Aaron James and his young brother. He's a Navy corpsman. This is a guy who stitched people together on the battlefield, okay, who served his country with distinction. And he runs up there to help. He realizes he can't. They're already doing CPR. He can't do anything. But he sees two police shields on the ground. He gives one to his brother, and they hold up the shields so that the people doing CPR are not gassed into non-function, right, where they can't help Roseanne anymore. And for that, he's been charged with assault with a deadly weapon, impeding police officers. I mean, you name it. They throw in the book at him.
Because he had the shield.
All of these people around Roseanne Boylan, they're only now, most of them have been in prison without trial for years. They're only now starting to get their day in court. Colt Maccabee, a deputy sheriff from Nashville, Tennessee. Okay, Colt was one of the people that tried to help Roseanne, was trying to do CPR on her. When a police officer was dragged into the crowd, he put his body over that officer. You can hear him on the video, on his body cam, saying, "I'm not hurting you, man. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm here to help you. Let me try. Can you stand? Let me get you up." He goes through this whole thing. They just convicted Colt Maccabee for assaulting a police officer. They just convicted him. He has awards for bravery. There has been one miscarriage of justice after another. Actually talking to you about it, Stephen, because I'm so involved in trying to make sure that it's accurate, make sure the stories are good, make sure we get everything right. But as I speak to you about it, I just get so filled again with that absolute sense of injustice. It's
infuriating.
It's infuriating. And there's another Green Beret, former Green Beret of 20 years, Jeremy Brown. I want to tell you two things people said to me during these interviews. Jeremy Brown, it was in that trailer you played. He said, when I said you could be here for forever, and he said, "I will be here as long as the American people leave me here." And that is the truth. I want everybody listening to this to know, as long as we leave these people behind bars without trial, as long as we let people like Victoria White go to prison for obstructing police when they beat her almost to death. All that woman did was hold her hands over her face, right, to protect herself. And the other thing I want to tell you, and we're sitting in what people like to call flyover country, right? Right. I live in flyover country too.
Yes.
Well, guess what flyover country really means? I was interviewing Tommy Tatum, who almost died next to Roseanne Boylan at the bottom of that crush in the tunnel. And I said to him, he's a guy from Greenville, Mississippi. And he had a bunch of local radio stations in Greenville. And I said, "Tommy, you're not a journalist. That's not your background. Why'd you start a bunch of radio stations?" And he thought about it for a moment, and he looked at me and he said, "Lara," he said, "where I come from, it's just throwaway country. We're throwaway people. Nobody cares about us. None of these people, they never had a voice. They never had anybody to pay attention to them." And by the way, he happens to be white, and most of the people in Greenville, Mississippi happen to be black. Not that he cares, not that I care, but I raise it because when I traveled the length and breadth of this country, what I found over and over and over again was the depth of the lies of division. Yes, racism is a real thing, and we have to deal with that. And I don't know anyone who thinks racism is a good thing.
But the media stoke those...
The fires of hatred.
Right.
Yes, they want us all divided. And let me tell you, going through all this January 6th footage, you know what I find? Considering that black people, African American people make up, I don't know what it is, 13, 15% of the population, there is an extraordinary number of them were present at the Capitol on January 6th. And make no mistake, there was an extraordinary number of people who had never, ever, ever seen the capital of the United States before. There were more foreign tourists out there who had seen Washington, D.C. than January 6th. And they came there to exercise their First Amendment rights, and they came to do it peacefully, and we have abandoned them.
You mentioned the tunnel, and they were being pushed from behind. Have you had any theories on who might have been? Do you think they were Trump supporters that were pushing people to go forward, or do you think those could have been?
I do not. And there's always, when you're in a chaotic situation like that, as I know myself from being attacked in Egypt by a mob, there's people that join in, there's people that get caught up in the moment, but you have instigators, right? And it's very, very organized. It may look like chaos to you, but it's easy to set the conditions for chaos and to maintain the conditions. So I'll give you my personal example so that people can see it in a way that's not through a political lens, right? So when I'm in this crowd of people in Egypt, in Tahrir Square, right after Hosni Mubarak, the president of Egypt, has just stepped down after decades and decades and decades of rule, right? And some people, most of the people are celebrating, and they're saying, thank you Facebook, thank you Google, thank you Mark Zuckerberg, because this is the people's revolution. This was in the time when we still believed that technology was actually for the people and it was actually a good thing, and that the people at Google and Facebook were not the most worthless, evil people on the face of the earth. And so people were thanking them for their revolution and believing that it was organic, right, when it's not. And in that moment, just a few instigators started to say to the crowd, let's take her pants off, let's do this to her, let's do that to her. Because these are people who are trained, and they have studied human nature. They know how crowds behave, and they know exactly what to do. It's like taking a match. So you want to start a huge forest fire, right? You don't just want a little fire over here, you want a big fire. So you throw one match and another one and another one and another one. And then lo and behold, the flames are going. And what happens? Other people who weren't involved, well, they feel the fire and now suddenly they're burning, right? And so they're involved. And some of them know exactly what they're doing and most of them don't. So that's really what you're talking about. When you see that chaos is organic. It's real. It's chaotic. But some of those people know exactly what they're doing. And how do we know? Because we see them, right? We see them giving hand signals. We see them counting and then indicating to people behind them. That's how you know that there were people within that chaos who were making sure that certain things happened, right? And so in that tunnel, Rosanne Boyland had no intention of going into the Capitol. Philip Anderson, who was next to her, I've talked to Philip Anderson, he didn't. I talked to Justin Winchell, who was with Rosanne Boyland. They weren't going to go in there, but they get pushed. Now, some of those people in the crowd might just join in the pushing, like the way Ray Epps was pushing the sign, right, that other people have gone to prison for, but he was involved in pushing it, and the government just sort of, we'll just ignore that. Let's just explain that one away.
Yeah, that was on your show last night.
Yeah, we'll just throw that into the plea deal so it's covered by the plea deal, but we won't actually hold him to account.
Other guys that were there pushing that sign went off to prison. Ray Epps is doing it. He didn't go inside the Capitol, but he was there, as you say.
But there were people in prison who didn't go inside the Capitol who touched that sign. And they're in prison. And he's not. But I'm saying that because, there are people pushing. Was everyone who was pushing that sign, did they suddenly find people to the left and to the right of them were pushing, and so they started pushing? But either way, these people got trapped in that tunnel, trapped by the police being pushed from this side and trapped by the people. And now the police are trying to push people out of the tunnel, but there's nowhere for them to go. And Rosanne Boyland goes down. People couldn't breathe either. Remember, they're firing so much gas. There's a lot made in the January 6th committee and in these show trials of how the police, how terrible it was for them. But what nobody talks about is that a lot of the time they were inhaling their own gas, because the way those less than lethal munitions were being deployed was not according to standard. And these are not called non-lethal. Notice the difference in the term, right? These are not non-lethal munitions. They're called less than lethal for a reason, because if they're deployed in certain conditions, they become lethal. So you're not allowed to deploy a certain amount of a certain gas in a certain environment, right? Because once it's that, if there's nowhere for that gas to go and it just keeps building up, then it's going to become lethal. And that's what was starting to happen in that tunnel, right? And so what you have is in this situation, now it's been reported by the Epoch Times and a very, very good reporter there, Joe Henneman, who has been in touch with Rosanne Boyland's family, that she was hit in the chest with a pepper ball, and that being, one of the munitions that the police were using. We actually see on camera a guy just, spraying like this. We're still working on that part, making sure that we can confirm that independently, because we don't just rely on other people's reporting. And Rosanne Boyland went down. Whatever the reason was, she was in that crush, she went down. And when she was lying on the ground, unarmed and unconscious, a Capitol police officer by the name of Lila Morris is on camera beating her with a baton over and over and over. And we have interviewed people who were right next to Rosanne, who witnessed that, who actually heard the sounds of it crushing or connecting with her skull, breaking.
Is he still with the Capitol Hill Police? Or?
Oh, yes. Okay. She is still with the Capitol Police. And not only that, but she was a guest at the Super Bowl the following year, where she was brought out onto the field as a hero and saluted by the NFL and by all those people there.
It's just
and by the media.
Okay, you can't believe that this is happening in America.
No, what you can't believe is that Americans are allowing it to happen.
What do you think, when you say allowing it, what do you feel like ordinary Americans can do?
Okay, so first of all, I get really annoyed by that question when people ask me that, because I'm like, for crying in a bucket. You were born and raised in the freest country on earth. You have more rights than any other nation on the planet, and you can't figure it out? You can't figure out how to write a letter to your representative? You can't pick up a telephone? You can't figure out when you see, you want whistleblowers? You want people to stand up? You don't want FBI agents to go and put decent American citizens in prison for exercising their First Amendment rights? But where are your rallies? Mm-hmm. Where are your protests? Where are your petitions? Oh, what, are you scared now? You don't want to go like the January 6th prisoners? Are you, wait, you're wealthy. Where's your money? What are you using it for? Are you funding any of the people who are fighting their cases on January 6th?
Donald Trump's, he's taken some criticism for maybe not providing more resources.
Why should it all be? Donald Trump is facing 10,000 lawsuits, okay?
Yeah.
You know,
so you don't think it should fall on him specifically?
Why should it fall on him? Yeah. Is he the only Republican with money?
Yeah.
Is he even a Republican? I don't know. But is he the only American with money in this country who thinks that it's wrong to put people in prison for exercising their First Amendment rights? What is it you think your money is going to protect you from?
Right.
What are you hoarding your money for?
Tell me about
this.
Okay.
Stephen, this is a big and important point, because you've got Tariq Johnson. Do you know his name?
No.
Why don't you know his name? Why don't Americans know the name Tariq Johnson? He is a Capitol Police officer of 23 years. He was responsible for evacuating the Senate chamber and the House on January 6th. So we took more than 300 of supposedly the most important people in America, right? They were important enough for us to elect to public office. They represent the whole country.
Right.
He was the man. Their lives, if January 6th was such a security threat, it was so dangerous, and those people had to be protected, the one man that could be trusted by the United States government to take those people to safety was Tariq Johnson. And where is Tariq Johnson today? Working for a furniture removal company. He's lucky to have a job. He can't pay his mortgage. He can't pay his mortgage. He gave up his pension. He gave up 23 years of loyal, dedicated service. He sacrificed everything. And most of America doesn't even know his name. And even when they find out his name, you know what they do? They say, huh, and then they move right on. Mm-hmm. And they go back to, what should we have for dinner tonight? Where are we planning our next vacation? Does this outfit look nice on me? You know what I mean? That's what we're preoccupied with. So what has happened to the FBI agents who stood up? Where's Steve Friend, Kyle Seraphin? They did what they were supposed to do. Right. They were real whistleblowers, not like the fake whistleblower Eric Caramella, who went straight to Adam Schiff's nonsense committee and did the fake impeachment of Trump over Ukraine, which was a cover-up for what the Democrats have been doing in Ukraine. These are real whistleblowers. They went to their chain of command. They did everything within their power, you know, and we have abandoned them and turned our backs on them. So I'm tired of being asked, what should ordinary Americans do? First of all, you should get up. Mm-hmm. Get up and do something. Second of all, stop being such cowards. You're a bunch of cowards because you're not even willing to have a conversation at the dinner table at Thanksgiving with your children who've gone off to college and are sprouting a bunch of nonsense from this indoctrination center they've been at. You don't even want to have, oh no, we can't have any disagreements at Thanksgiving. We don't want anybody to be upset. We don't want to ruffle any feathers. Oh no, don't talk about Trump. You're quite happy to let a president, the leading candidate in a presidential race, literally be taken out by corrupt judges and a corrupt court system and corrupt politicians. And if you're a Republican, you say, whew, well, let's watch that debate and hope like hell there's somebody that has a chance of beating Trump, right? Because we want things to go back to the way they were. What? Where we all lied to each other. Where we all lied to each other and we took American tax dollars. The working man across this country whose tax dollars are being used to slit our throats. Does the average working person out there want to finance Zelensky's war? No. Do they want to finance an open border? Do they want to pay for millions of illegal immigrants to have food and shelter and the ability to work? Is that what they want their money to go on?
No. I mean,
were they ever asked?
No, they weren't.
Were they ever given the option of voting for that?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying, and we often talk on this show about we feel like the country's being attacked from within. I mean, it really is.
It is. Yeah. So great. Great. We're all woken up. We've all woken up, right? What are we doing about it?
Right.
Where is the organization that is providing jobs to whistleblowers for standing up? Where is the organization that says, here's 3 months' rent to help you get on your feet? Where are the people that are standing up and saying, you know what, let's have a speaking event at my company and pay a speaking fee and have this person come in and tell their story, because we know that mainstream media has information dominance. Oh, by the way, wait, this is a Christian school, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so where are the people standing up for the Christians who are being attacked?
Right.
Where are the people who stood up for Donald Trump? 22 churches were burned in Washington, D.C. when Donald Trump walked across Lafayette Park and went to one of the oldest churches in America, a historically protected site, and he held up a Bible. You think he did that because he's some TV guy? Did he do that really? Because he just wanted to make a show? He did it because he was saying to you, Christians, Christian nation, you are under attack. Your churches are being burned to the ground and you as Christians are being targeted. Your faith is on the chopping block. What are you willing to do about it? And you know what the answer was from most people?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Speaking of religious persecution, I'd be interested to get your observations on the October 7 attack and then just the way that subject and now the Gaza war has been treated since.
The October 7th attack. So I was in Israel. I have worked in Israel as a journalist. I've been in Bethlehem, Hebron, Ramallah, Gaza, Haifa, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, villages I can't even remember the names of. I was there in the first, for the end of the first Intifada, there in the second Intifada, there in the Hezbollah war. I have helped people, Palestinians, literally dig through the rubble and pull out Palestinian kids. I've run with them as they've rushed them to the hospitals to try to get treated and found hospitals with limited supplies. I have been on the Israeli side of that, watched people bearing their children run from the rockets of Hezbollah, hidden in shelters. I've seen the aftermath of suicide bombings where people have been obliterated. So I have really personally lived and felt. I've watched them pull Israeli undercover officers out of a police station in Ramallah and tear their bodies to pieces, okay? So I have seen suffering on both sides. But the only thing, to me, there's two most critical, important things. I have been trying to tell people for years that when they stand up and say never again about the Holocaust, they are lying. They are lying to the world and they are lying to themselves, because the next Holocaust has already begun. I have been saying this for 10 years because the next Holocaust, the birthplace of that, the incubator of the next Holocaust is the left. It is not the right. That doesn't mean you can't drag out some stupid idiot on the right wearing a swastika saying some horrible thing about Jewish people. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the incubator of the ideology and the infrastructure and the hatred has been the left. And now what is being exposed, so that is the one important thing to come out of this. And the second important thing to come out of it is this alliance between the Islamists and those who hate Jewish people.
Yeah.
So the left hates Jewish people, which is ironic because you still have all these Jewish people all over America voting for the left.
I know.
It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And they will attack me for saying that. They'll hate me for saying that. I couldn't care less. I cannot even tell you. It doesn't make my heart rate go up. It doesn't raise my stress level. I couldn't care less. You're nothing to me. You're absolute. The New York Times, you're nothing. You could write every single day for the rest of my life that I'm crazy, that I'm worthless, that my career means nothing, blah, 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 blah. I'm sorry. Are you the same people that lied about Russia collusion, that took Pulitzer Prizes for stories that didn't even happen?
Right.
They didn't even exist. Enjoy your prize. Congratulate yourself every time you look at it.
Yeah.
Give yourself another pat on the back. You lied about Hunter Biden's laptop. You lied about COVID. People have died in the millions because you have lied about COVID and you've lied about the experimental, I won't even call it a vaccine, medications. You're still pushing those lies. You are absolutely worthless to me. I'm not interested in what you have to say. So coming back to Israel and Hamas, what is being exposed is that free Palestine, there are people out there who sincerely believe that they should free Palestine. It's sort of ironic because they want a ceasefire, but they had a ceasefire. I just wanted to say, before October 7th,
right,
you had a ceasefire.
Exactly, yeah.
You also had a free Palestine. You did. You didn't have any Israeli occupying forces. The Israelis actually evicted tens of thousands of Jews from land that they gave up when they pulled out. Now that I understand, I've been there, I know the Israelis own the air, they own the airspace, they own the seas, because although Gaza has, its own people in the water, the Israeli warships and surveillance and everything dwarfs what they have. But let's not forget, Let's ask the NGOs. Let's ask the United Nations. Let's ask all of the, the Boycott Israel movement, all that money that was raised. How come not one single person in Gaza, how come none of their lives improved? Education level didn't go up. Access to clean drinking water didn't go up. Access to housing didn't go up. Job opportunities didn't go up. You know what did go up? Let me see. Porsche dealerships. Like really high level, massive facilities, right? That sell luxury cars and luxury goods.
Well, all the Hamas leaders are in Qatar living in these penthouses and filthy rich.
Or underground.
In
the tunnel systems that they built underground. Now, I understand you're fighting for your liberation, but what your liberation actually, as you define it, how does Hamas define liberation? Hamas defines liberation as the genocide of all Jews and the annihilation of Israel. That's what liberation means to Hamas. So I have a soft heart. My mother used to say to me that the problem with you, my girl, is that you got your bladder behind your bloody eyeballs, right? Because everything would break my heart and make me cry. And I don't want to see a single Palestinian suffer. I know that all across Gaza, there are families, and across the West Bank, torn apart. And it honestly is beyond devastating.
Yeah.
Same for the people across Israel. Families torn apart. I don't even want to think about what it must be like. I was gang raped and sodomized and beaten almost to death for just over 40 minutes. I cannot imagine what it is to be in the custody of people who can do anything they want to you, day after day after day after day, with no end in sight.
I don't want to jump all over the place, but you're bringing up a lot of different topics, but how did that assault in 2011, first, Obama didn't exactly back Mubarak at that time. So, you say there's the instigators in the mob and that sort of thing, but it seemed like the Obama administration really wanted a change of leadership in Egypt. Is that the way you remember it?
Well, it's funny. Obama actually called me personally. I remember I was upstairs in the attic at my house. My sister was there, and my husband came up with the phone, and I yelled at him because I said, I don't want to talk to anyone. This was a few days after I'd got home, actually a few days after I got out of the hospital. And he said, it's the White House. The president wants to talk to you.
So he called you after the assault?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and I got letters from Hillary Clinton and all of these people, and I raised this because they all hate me now, right? And what they want to say, General Petraeus included. I remember General Petraeus saying this to me. I was at a film premiere for Ben Affleck's movie about the Iran and the hostages, and I remember General Petraeus looking at me and saying, "Oh, Lara, how are you?" And this is when he was head of the CIA, and I said, "I'm good, thanks. How are you?" And he was like, took both my hands, and my husband was sitting next to me, and he was like, "No, you're not. I know you're not. And it's okay." And I was like, "What are you talking about? I'm fine." And he said, it's okay. And I sat down, I looked at my husband, I said, "Did the head of the CIA just act like I'm a crazy person and I'm somehow not okay?" And he said, "Yep, that's just what happened." And I knew in my heart that something was coming down the line, because they have nothing else. They've got nothing else. The only thing they have when they can't deal with the substance of what you say is that they make you out to be crazy, right? And if you look at it, what was it Petraeus involved in then at the time? He was very much involved in Benghazi. And I had talked to him. I personally flew from New York when we were editing to go and talk to Petraeus about Benghazi and get the truth, right, about what happened. But they just made that whole thing go away. And I've forgotten your question. There was a reason I was telling you about that.
What
did Obama want at the time?
Yeah.
Well, what Obama wanted at the time was, he wanted Benghazi to go away. They all did, right? Because we still don't have the truth about Benghazi. And what they wanted, they were supporting the people on the ground, right? They were supporting the protesters.
The uprising.
But they had a problem. And what was the problem? Was that Egypt was the #1 supporter of the United States throughout the war on terror. After 9/11, who was helping the U.S. behind the scenes? Who was doing those renditions? When the CIA renditioned somebody, right? That person's got to go somewhere. Well, a lot of them were going to Egypt, or they were going to facilities that Egypt had in allied countries around the Middle East, or they were going to places like Alexandria, which is just up the coast from Cairo, where they had ships offshore, and they were renditioning people to those ships. And I spent some time in Alexandria, right? And I know what was going on in there. That's the home of the Muslim Brotherhood. But if you look at it now, something very interesting has been exposed. I was in Cairo when Obama came to power, and he did his first big speech in the Middle East. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And he went to Cairo and he apologized.
Right.
And I thought Obama was...
Were you at the speech?
I was, yes.
Wow.
I thought Obama was impressive, right? I thought a great orator, first black policeman, president of the United States. I came from South Africa. Right. Mandela was our first president. I looked at Obama like he was a kind of young Mandela. In fact, I'm embarrassed to say I even said it to him when I met Obama in Afghanistan, in Kabul, at the embassy when I interviewed him.
Yeah.
When he was still a senator and he was running for office. I actually paid him that compliment, and I regret it, and I take it back. I would like Obama to know I was wrong. He's nothing like Nelson Mandela. In fact, he's not even fit to be mentioned in the same sentence. And
what do you see are his?
So I'll tell you what he was doing at that time.
Yeah.
What you are seeing is the beginning of what we see now. That alliance between the left and the Islamists.
Right.
Obama was putting that on an international scale, on a global level, because what did his administration proceed to do after that? They went on to deny the strength of Al-Qaeda and to begin to pull back the narrative about Islamic terrorism. They got the Open Society Foundation, and George Soros created an entire thing. Islamophobia was created by the Soros crowd. Okay, there was actually papers that were leaked on that have somehow been scrubbed from the internet. They created this term called Islamophobia, and they made it so that you couldn't talk about Islamic terrorism without being now an Islamophobe. So that was manufactured by the Obama administration. You'll remember something truly crazy, right? Remember, it was reported that Obama told the head of NASA, a guy called Charlie Bolden, who was actually a black astronaut. I think he was the first. Very lovely man, very impressive. And it was reported that he told him, don't talk about our accomplishments in space. You need to talk about the Islamic world's accomplishments in space. Now, I read about this and I thought that can't be true. That's nonsense. Sometime later, I'm doing a story unrelated with NASA, and I get to interview this gentleman when he's head of NASA still at the time. And I said to him off camera, I gotta ask you something. Is this true? And he said, oh yes, it's absolutely true. The President of the United States instructed me to not talk about America's accomplishments in space, but to focus on the achievements of the Arab world and the Islamic world in space. And I said, but Charlie, I said, I'm not a space expert, but I don't recall any. Do they have any? And he said, not yet. But they're starting to work on it. Why did Obama push the Islamic world? Why was he pushing that? He was continuing the tradition of Hitler. Because where did Hitler go before the Second World War? He went all over the Islamic world. He made deals with Islamic countries. The Islamists and the left were always aligned. And you might say to me, okay, there'll be people going nuts listening to this right now. You're probably wondering why on earth did we let this woman unleash this woman on. I'll tell you why. I'll finish this point, okay? The reason I say that is the National Socialist Party. They can try to rewrite history all they like, but the agenda is a socialist agenda. They're just two sides of the same coin. They were fighting for control of that. The Franco's fascists and the Antifa, the anti-fascists, they were fighting for power. They weren't fighting each other because one believes in freedom of speech and the other doesn't. No, if you look at their platform, they don't believe in freedom of any kind. They don't believe in individual freedom. They don't believe in freedom of religion. They don't believe in God, either of them. They don't believe in freedom of speech. They definitely don't believe in freedom of thought. If you actually look at the platforms and you don't look at the labeling, what you see is a fight, not to fight each other because ideologically they oppose each other. No, in fact, the Islamists in the Arab world, Jews are hated just as much as they were by the Nazis. These people are aligned. They're not against each other. They're actually aligned. And then what ended up happening with Obama's administration? Why did he clash with Michael Flynn? Because when Obama was saying, oh, remember, ISIS is a JV team? Oh, and then the JV team took Mosul. But what happened in between that? General Michael Flynn went on Capitol Hill in public testimony, in open testimony, and he told the Senate Intelligence Committee that ISIS was storming its way across Iraq. They had taken tons of territory and they would take tons more. So the only person who wasn't surprised when Mosul fell was General Flynn and all the people who were actually following the real intelligence and weren't lying to the American people and lying to each other. And there are still people like Milley, these disgusting people that have no right to even wear the uniform today. So what you saw emerging, and that is now being exposed. October 7th brought all of that out into the open. Right. Jewish students have long been unwelcome on the campuses that they have financed, that their grandfathers and great-grandfathers have financed, right? That they're still financing. Jewish people have been maligned and hated by the left. When the squad is painted as if they're some sort of remote part of the Democrat Party and that they don't represent everybody, that's not true. That's a lie. Look at the people out on the streets and look at what you have done. How does that tie to your open border policy? Well, you're watching it unfold.
Well, the hour has gone by. I have so many other things here, but maybe you can stay with us after the show is over, and we'll tape a short segment before we head over to lunch. But before we go, maybe you can give the viewers your contact info, where they can get to your X page or your videos that you're producing. And how many parts in this series? 14?
Yes.
Wow.
Although each one is like peeling off another layer of skin. These are hard to do, and I want people to know it's possible. You can produce quality investigative journalism. We do it on a shoestring, and we do it with a small team, but everybody's very committed. Yeah. It's called The Rest of the Story with Lara Logan, and you can find me on Twitter, but if you go to Truth and Media, who's my partner, on Twitter or online, they have a Truth and Media website. That's up now. You can find the show. The first season is about January 6th. The second season I'm planning on doing on human trafficking and human farming, because that is a real thing you cannot imagine. I have a girl who had 17 children by her foster father, all of whom were taken away from her. And then the border. No one's going to escape as long as I have breath left in my body.
Your series, by the way, I know we're past time. They'll deal with it in the control room. But your series comes out. It comes out at a great time. The House just decided to release the 44,000 hours of footage.
Yes, good for Mike Johnson for doing that.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yes, he kept 5% though.
Oh, really?
So we want to know what's in the 4,000 hours.
We want everything.
Yes, we want everything.
And we are back with our special guest, Lara Logan. Let's talk a little bit about your background. I want to get into the career in journalism, but you were born in, how long were you in South Africa?
So I was born and raised in South Africa.
Okay.
And I went to school there. But when I was 17, I got on a plane and moved to Paris.
Okay.
And I went and worked as an au pair. So I was, and then I moved to New York, entered illegally. On a tourist visa.
Okay.
Actually, I didn't have any visa. I just showed up at the airport and they said, "Where's your visa?" And I said, "What visa?" Because I had an Irish passport. I'd gone all over and no one ever asked me for a visa before. So they took me aside, interrogated me, and then they stamped my passport.
Okay.
So technically, I didn't enter illegally.
And then you never went back? Or, I mean,
no.
To live anyway.
No, I did go back to live. I went back and I went back to college. But I started working for the biggest daily newspaper, Sunday newspaper, first in high school. And then when I went back to college, I went to the daily newspaper and I said, "You don't have anybody on your staff my age. Let me work and you don't have to pay me, or you can pay me for what you print, whatever you want."
Right.
And they did. So I went to college in South Africa, and then right as I was finishing college was about the time that the country was moving towards releasing Nelson Mandela from prison. Those negotiations were it was, you could tell it was heading that way. And I wanted to be part of that. There was no doubt in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to work for a foreign company because South African media was so restricted by South African laws.
Yeah.
And I got the Foreign Press Association book, which had listed all the foreign journalists working in the country. And I went all the way through, and I got hired by a company called Viz News, which became Reuters. It was bought out, was Reuters. And when I was sitting there waiting for the interview, I was watching the bureau chief at the time, who was a cameraman, and he got promoted to bureau chief. And he was trying to type, and he was using 2 fingers, and it was painful. And I could tell, he kept asking me how to spell words. He was a great cameraman and an amazing journalist. And he was not a writer. And I said, "Sir, would you like me to do that for you?" He said, "Could you?" So that's how I wormed my way into that job. They made me interview for that job about 2 years later, by the way.
Yeah. Had you taken college training in journalism or writing, or?
No.
So what made you? Oh, you said you just wanted to be part of the...
I was always a writer.
Okay.
That was my first love. That's what I was, a writer and a reader. We were raised in a house of books.
Right.
My parents, you were not allowed to defile a book. You couldn't fold over a page. Books were sacred in our house. And my father was one of the original collectors of National Geographic. So we had mountains of National Geographic. We could use them for research for school projects. We were not allowed to cut out the pictures. That was a real pain, because National Geographic had the perfect pictures for every school project you ever needed. And so I went to and worked all through college at the newspaper.
Yeah.
I never wanted to miss a day. I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to see it for myself. And there was no way really for me to get in. South Africa at that time was very violent. It was fighting against apartheid. And the townships, which were the areas on the outskirts of the city and around the white suburbs at the time, that was where much of the violence was happening. So nobody wanted to let a little 17-year-old white girl go into those places.
Right.
So I had to beg, borrow, steal, and worm my way into them, going in at night.
And you still, you write your segments to this day, right? So when you, for the process, do you sit down and write your story first and then go find the interview, the footage, whatever, or do you sometimes see?
You just, I mean, that's a kill shot, what you just said. You just might as well have taken a gun and put a bullet right in the middle of my forehead. I'm a journalist. I don't write the story in advance. That would make me a propagandist.
Okay, I got you. But I mean, do you sometimes see footage or see a character or a person that you think that would make an interesting story? Or
oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes, of course. But at the point that I'm making is really one that's very important for people to understand. Journalists investigate and research, right? That's your job, is to research and learn as much as you can. So it might be a person that's interesting. It might be an event that's interesting, you know, or important or significant. And you learn as much as you can about that. But often people will say to me, especially in the world outside of TV news, right? If you go into the Netflix world or the Hulu or the whatever, right? They'll say to you, okay, you've got an idea for a show. And they say, okay, well, what's the format? And you say, well, it's an investigative journalism show. So they say, okay, but what's the format? And that's how I learned that all these shows are formulaic, right? That say House Hunters, you're going to have, you've got a couple, you've got a realtor, and they're looking for 3 types of houses, and they're going to go out and then they're going to compare, and then there's going to be a segment where they discuss, or whether it's a house building show or whatever, you can expand that out. You can start to see the formula. But the purpose of investigative journalism is that you don't know the answer before you set out. Now, you can inform yourself. You have to inform yourself as much as humanly possible. But I can tell you there has never been a story in my life where I haven't, and I have done, I don't know, tens of thousands, maybe over 100,000 interviews in my career. And I have never sat down in front of someone and not learned something new. You cannot do enough research. Yeah. That's the great thing about journalism, is that when you can't know enough. So my colleagues, I lived 5 years in Baghdad, right, in Iraq. One of my teammates, who's a great friend of mine, said to me once, do you know how hard it is working on your team? And I said, why? I was nonplussed. I didn't understand it, because I treat people with respect. I mean, everybody's an equal on my team. I mean, these are like my brothers and sisters, you know, like we really went through a lot together. And I'm like, why on earth would you say that? And he's like, because you outwork everyone. It's impossible to outwork you. And I said, because it's impossible to know enough. I'm not trying to outwork you. I'm not trying to prove something. I'm trying to understand. And in the course of trying to understand, I cannot ever know enough. But in order to produce a product, you have to set some limits to that, right? You can't investigate something for 50 years and do one story and expect to get paid every day. So you find that balance. And I found my balance in long form. I'm not that person that wants to go out and do a daily show every day and pretend to be an expert on everything under the sun. I tried that at CNN. I hated it. I sucked, because people know when you're speaking from knowledge and experience, and you know when someone's winging it. They might get away with it this time and that time, but over time, you forget those people. Their names don't endure. I've been taken off everywhere. I've been canceled by just about everybody, and people still know my name. Why is that? Because I'm honest, because I have integrity, and because I'm not going away. I'm not going away because I was tasked by God to do this, and I'm going to do this until the day I die. And by the way, I'm not suicidal. Just for the record.
Appreciate
that. Not suicidal.
So, yeah, you said, I mean, you look at your history, you've been with practically every news agency, and then, as you just said, you've been fired by nearly all of them as well. Maybe
Never fired.
Never fired?
Oh, no, they don't have the balls to fire you. In fact, not just that, they don't have a reason to fire me, because I've never actually committed a fireable offense. I get canceled. I get canceled because people don't want the truth.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me about some of the high points or low points, I guess, over the years where And for what reason do you feel like such and such let you go or let the contract expire? I mean, I know of a couple, but
well, Benghazi's the big one, right? Because that was CBS. I was the future of 60 Minutes, which is the #1 news program in the world. I mean, there's no investigative news program that's been more successful or that's been more respected.
Yeah.
Look at it today.
Right.
You know, I was targeted over my reporting on Benghazi. And the truth is that we really don't know. I still don't know the truth. For people who want to look it up, and I actually am happy to give you a copy so you can play the story and people can watch it. When they erase something from the internet, when they don't want you to see it, and they only want you to read the narrative, read what they say about it, that tells you that they're lying, right? Because they fear what I reported.
Yeah.
And there was only one person and two parts of his story, two small parts of his story that they used that were cast into doubt. Nobody ever proved that they weren't true, but they cast enough doubt on them. And then that guy disappeared.
Right.
And there's a lot more to that story. I won't go on about it forever. I'm happy to talk to people about it anytime. But the reality is that they take, what I learned from that is they take things that are irrelevant or not so important, and they go after that because they cannot attack the substance. And they did me a favor because I could never have been part of 60 Minutes today. I mean, my goodness, they put Bill Gates on 60 Minutes, they give him a platform, and they don't ask him about all the people in South Sudan and India, the children that have been disabled because of his so-called vaccines and been rendered infertile. They don't ask about that. They give a platform to these morons from CISA and these liars from the FBI to go and talk about insurrection and the most secure election in history. Shame on you.
Right.
Shame on you, 60 Minutes. I don't even recognize who you are. In fact, what I think happened is they used me, right, as the warning. I was the warning, because after that, 60 Minutes became a shadow of itself. Now, it still does great work and great stories. There's amazing people there, and I have so much respect for them. But they don't ever do anything of importance.
Has your worldview or your I guess some would consider you more conservative, but you said you don't like I
don't like those terms. I don't even know what they mean.
Yeah.
What does conservative mean? I mean, when I was growing up, I believed that, I believe in tolerance. I always believed in tolerance, except, you could say I grew up in a very liberal family, right? And I was speaking badly about the right wing in South Africa once. And I remember my father, who was very liberal, looked at me and he said, but if you believe in tolerance, don't you have to tolerate those people too? And I said, no. What was I, 18, 19, 20? Sound familiar, anybody? No. And he said, why not? And I said, well, because they're wrong. And racism is wrong. And anybody who believes that, they don't have a right to believe in that. You can't believe in something that's unjust. Does that sound familiar? Fast forward to today. Trump supporters, no, they're wrong. They don't have a right to exist, right? So it took me many, many years to see. I still don't believe in racism. I can't abide it. I've spent my entire life fighting against it. And it's probably the only thing, the only slur that they haven't ever been able to use against me. And by the way, there's an army of people that would come out and defend me on that because they know it's not true, right? But look at what they were breeding. They were breeding an ideology that is completely and utterly intolerant, but goes under the label of tolerance. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're seeing today. So I think, I know there are differences between the left and the right. I know there are differences between traditional understanding of Democrat and Republican, but I see those labels as forms of control. Because if we are fighting each other and we're so focused on being against each other, those are mechanisms through which we can be easily manipulated. We can disagree on things. I disagree with people all the time. I teach my children, actually. We don't have to agree on this. Like, I don't agree with you. On these gender issues, I don't agree. And if you die tomorrow, and 100 years from now they dig up your body, you're still going to be a girl. Right? That's the way it is. Lo and behold, what did I see? I've been saying that for years. I saw they're targeting anthropologists now and pressuring anthropologists to no longer use those definitions of when they're finding, bones and things like that. No longer using female and male because they say it's discriminating against what? All the lunatics who didn't know who they were? I mean, give me a break. Okay, I'm not playing that game. So I don't consider myself conservative. I don't consider myself Republican. If you notice, I've never been embraced by the conservatives. Roger Ailes never offered me a job. I actually was never paid to be on Fox News. I was paid to be on Fox Nation, their online subscription service that they were trying to build.
That was sort of your last assignment in what would be the mainstream of
media
reporting. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
And did that end amicably or was?
Yes, very amicably. My boss called me and said, we need you to stay silent for a while, lie low.
For what reason?
He was a very brave man, actually. He was the head of Fox Nation. He was brave because he took me on when the front office and the powers that be at Fox really didn't want to. They weren't going to commit to a contract and take on Lara Logan and put the weight of the network or the organization behind me.
Yeah.
And what I did was I went back to the beginning.
Right.
I took a salary that was less than I earned as my first job at CBS News as a young correspondent. And bear in mind, at this point, I'd been a journalist for almost 30 years, right? I'd been the face of 60 Minutes, right? So I'd not just been a journalist, had almost every award that there is in journalism I have. And I went back to my original salary, less than my first salary. And I worked with a great team of people, none of whom knew anything about journalism because they'd not worked as journalists. They were TV people and they were great people, but I had to teach them how to do 60 Minutes in the 60 Minute style and about journalism. And I thank God every day that I had people who were willing to learn and who wanted to do that because they were amazing. And we did this show for Fox Nation. And I built relationships with the shows on Fox News. I built relationships with the producers and the correspondents. And they used me because I was good for ratings, because people wanted to hear what I had to say. And because I was to talk on, I could cover the gambit. It's Islamic terrorism. Is it the open border? Is it human trafficking? Is it, I have a lot of experience. And so I was a great asset to them and they never paid me for that. And then the show got renewed for another season and we were just about to do a third season when I was asked on camera during COVID when Dr. Fauci came out and said, I am science. So if you criticize me, you criticize science. He told this to Margaret Brennan on one of the Sunday shows. And so I was asked on air at Fox, what do you think of that? Is Fauci science? And I said, well, a lot of people I talk to don't see Fauci as science. They see him more as Dr. Joseph Mengele, the doctor of death. Now, of course, we live in a false society where you can call Trump Hitler all day long. You can call Trump supporters Nazis all day long. And Chris Matthews, by the way, lost his job for comparing Bernie Sanders to Hitler.
Yeah.
But you are not allowed to touch that. And ironically, a week after I said that, do you know what happened? The head of the EU came out and made a speech in which she said it's time for the EU to take on the issue of forced vaccine mandates. Why is that so significant? Because the Nuremberg Code was written because of Dr. Joseph Mengele. The Nuremberg Code prevents the EU and people in governments all over the world from forcing people to be vaccinated. And I unwittingly, and I put this down to God, got ahead of their narrative. They were working to get rid of the Nuremberg Code so they could force vaccine mandates. Not just in Europe, it would have gone from Europe to all over the world. And that's why they didn't want anybody to touch Joseph Mengele. And I found it incredible that Jewish people, the ADL, these kind of people, they're coming after me. You've got a guy, I didn't say it, I had doctors telling me this. Doctors, one doctor after another, telling me that Anthony Fauci will go down as the biggest mass killer in history. And what people didn't know as well is that COVID is not Fauci's first run at this, at mass murder. Okay, HIV was his first run at mass murder. Fauci was involved in approving AZT, which was marketed as the panacea for people with HIV, which murdered people, countless numbers of people with HIV. Because what did AZT do? It didn't cure HIV. It mimicked the progression of the disease, and people taking it didn't know if they were dying of AIDS or dying of AZT. And so, in fact, I stood in graveyards in South Africa, graveyards on a Sunday evening, where they would dig the rows of graves for the babies that would die that week. Graves this big, and then a little bit bigger for the kids, a little bit older, and then a little bit bigger. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of graves. Do you know how many millions of people died from HIV? Because of people like Anthony Fauci, when they knew, they sat on antiretrovirals, that they knew the immune system was the secret to overcoming AIDS. They knew that you could live with it. And instead they pushed a treatment that killed people. Does that sound familiar to you? And by the way, last point on Fauci, look up the experiments that they did with HIV. They did those experiments on Black, and I hate it when people say brown, but on Hispanic and African American babies and children. Most of them in the foster care system with no parents. They took the most vulnerable and they forced those treatments on those children. And there's no outrage. There's no outrage over that. Fauci is a small little man, and I really hope he gets accountability.
Do you feel like COVID was weaponized to influence the election or to rig the election in the States?
COVID was weaponized for a number of effects, not just one. Most importantly, I mean, first and foremost, yes, in a tactical sense, COVID was without a doubt changed every election law in every swing state and engineered a false outcome to the election, was highly instrumental in that. It wasn't the only tool they used, but it was a big one.
Right.
But what does Yuval Noah Harari say? If your audience doesn't know the name Yuval Noah Harari, they need to look it up, because Yuval Noah Harari says it. This man wrote the book Sapiens, which was pushed by Obama, by the way, that Christmas when that book came out. You must read Sapiens. He is the man that says we are in the last throes of humanity. These are the last generations of humans as humans. These are the people pushing for transhumanism or a post-human world, right? Where we're part machine and we're hybrids. Actually, he says we can become gods. Now, of course, he doesn't mean you and me, right? He doesn't mean your students on campus. He means a tiny number of people. But what did he say about COVID? He said COVID was how we ushered in the era of mass surveillance. And that is far more lasting than Donald Trump. Far more lasting. This election was critical to engineering that outcome and that future, but that's the world they want, the world of mass surveillance. What is your phone? It is a mass surveillance device. What is your iPad? A mass surveillance device. What is that chip that they're putting in people now that's actually been done in Sweden and other places? What's the chip you put in your dog and cat to track them? What's that app? These are all tools of mass surveillance. But most importantly, as Yuval Noah Harari says, not only did people agree to mass surveillance, right? Because now we agreed in what is contact tracing? Mass surveillance. What is a digital health passport? Mass surveillance. So that thing that was protected, your medical health, right? Your personal medical history, that was protected by so many laws. That's out the window with a digital health passport, right? Of any kind, or, a public vaccine record. So not only did it implement that system, but on top of that, we agreed to do that globally. So we agreed to give other governments who we haven't elected, we've got nothing to do with them, plus international bodies like the World Health Organization, give them control and say over it. So we're already living under a global government. And then on top of that, what else did we agree? To having it under the skin. So COVID was much more significant than just the election.
Right.
Although Donald Trump, as the great disruptor, had the ability to stop all of this and certainly to overturn and expose it. I mean, I look at Donald Trump as the great white light, because he shone a light on so many of this. Why did we have a Space Force that was classified for all those years? Why was it classified? Why couldn't the American people know what we were doing in space?
Right.
We have many classified programs where we don't share every detail to protect operational security. Why were we lying about that? I mean, does anyone really think we went to the moon how many decades ago and we never went back? Why didn't we go back? You know, it's ridiculous. So a lot of this stuff is classified because it's full of dark money, where people in Congress are getting rich. And guess who's not getting rich? You know, the average person out there. But guess who's paying for it?
Yeah.
Oh, the average person out there. So Donald Trump did things like that, right? He declassified Space Force, which was, he immediately took a $69 billion budget that was dark money, which is, dark money is where you steal and get away with it. And he put it in the light. Right. And then they write stupid articles about him saying, well, he's got 3 lobbyists on his team, so therefore he's not really draining the swamp. Oh, except he drained the swamp, right? He drained the swamp in ways that most people don't even understand. So that presidency was very significant. Using COVID to prevent him from getting to the White House was very significant. But what did they do on a global scale with mass surveillance?
Did you have any
ushering us, forcing us, pushing us into a digital world?
When you were at Fox Nation, did you do any reporting on the election steal, or I mean, I think Fox's position on that has been to not talk about it or downplay it.
Yeah.
Although some of the hosts have, like Jesse Waters, has at least gone a little bit in that direction here recently.
Yeah, Jesse Waters pushes the envelope, and he's a brave man for doing so. Tucker was doing that before they got rid of him. You know, Fox tried, but look, it was over, okay, for Fox when Roger Ailes died. It was over. They were already infiltrated before that. But once Roger was out of the way, it was done.
Yeah.
And there's the great thing about the truth is people always tell you that these things are complex. But there's always a very simple moment where you can see things for what they really are. So if you could just get rid of all that ambiguity that they create, right, to hide and obscure the truth, and you drill down on that one thing. So that one thing is election night. And it's that one moment where the Fox guy calls Arizona with less than 10% of the vote counted.
Right.
That man, I mean, he's a DNC operative.
Yeah.
Why is Fox hiring a DNC operative? Okay, so that's another simple moment, right? These are very simple truths that tell you everything you need to know.
Right.
Okay, they called Arizona for a very simple reason. In 2016, you had ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN fighting back the tears because they were so devastated that Trump won. If they had been the ones to call the election for Biden, Fox would have been forced to hold the line, wouldn't they?
Right.
They would have been forced to be the ones to say, hey, wait a minute, they're lying again. It's not true, just like they did in 2016. By having Fox call the election for Biden, you threw the right into disarray. You threw the independents into disarray. And then you had key figures on the political side, like Mitch McConnell, right? Mitch McConnell.
Right.
And others who stood up and said, you know, we've got to have an orderly transition and, you know, we've got to own it. I think even Chip Roy from Texas was one of them who was very vocal about that. There were a number of key Republicans who led the charge. So that left what? It left the voters saying, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Like, no incumbent has increased the voters, their vote amongst their own base, amongst their own party, and amongst independents, and lost the election since Grover Cleveland. That's 134 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's not possible. Oh, by the way, he did it with dementia from his basement at these stupid little staged rallies with their circles around their chairs.
Right. The hula hoops.
Going to a Biden rally in 2000 2020, I mean, literally was like being put under anesthetic and having the blood drained out of your body. Yeah, that's how exciting it was.
Some that I saw were single digits, like nobody was out there. And then when the media announced that he won, the car honking incident, that was it was so surreal. Like
watching people push that narrative is like sucking your face off. I mean, it is the most unpleasant experience because it's just ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And you know how we know it's ridiculous? They have put people in jail for saying it. They have put people in prison for protesting it. They have silenced people. They have taken their jobs. They've taken their careers. They have done everything humanly possible. And you know what they haven't managed to do? Convince anyone.
Right.
Who knows it was stolen.
Well, I mean, even the insurrection, as your video has in the title, that was meant to cover up, all of it. Investigating, fraud.
Oh, no bueno. Don't be asking questions about the election. Not allowed.
Right.
Not allowed. Don't look any further, because it's just like Ray Epps or Jeffrey Epstein, or the election. You pull that thread.
Yeah. And
what are you going to find? You're going to find the most powerful people in America.
Right. What do you feel like going forward, 2024? I mean, do you have confidence that it can even be a legitimate election next year?
No.
You feel like there's going to be massive fraud?
It can't be a legitimate election. Of course there's going to be massive fraud. The fraud has already begun.
Right.
So the first and most important thing that they do with the fraud is they pad the voter rolls. Because the one thing that the cheaters can't have, right? They don't know exactly how many Trump supporters are going to show up at the polls. They've got a good idea based on previous elections, who voted, who didn't, all that data that they've been stealing from you, or buying from you or whatever else. All those stupid surveys, don't answer any of those surveys, okay, online. So they have a good idea, but they don't worry about every Trump voter, right, across the whole country. They worry about the key districts.
Right.
Which are the districts that are going to sway the election, right? They focus on those areas. And so that makes their life much simpler, because you now just narrowed it down. It's like January 6th. I don't have to look at 44,000 hours. I can narrow it down. Let me look at this, 5% that they withheld from us. Let's just focus on that. So that's what they do with the vote. And they've got very, very sophisticated mechanisms with artificial intelligence and people who know how to do this. So they figure out how much of the vote they think Trump is going to get in a certain area. Then they have to make sure that they beat that. They don't like people to vote on election day, because although they can project that, it's uncertain, right? There's a variable there that they don't control. That's why they want the early voting.
Right.
That's why they want the automatic voter registration. Oh, in Colorado, go get my driver's license. Okay, you're automatically registered to vote. Guess what that means? That means for 2 years before you ever go to the polls, you are a registered voter and I can now use your vote. So what do they do with people who are illegal, right? They register them in the census. So they count them in the census, right? Then they report that to systems like ERIC, Electronic Voter Registration System, which was really, seriously, this is supposed to be nonpartisan. Give me a break. It makes me want to vomit every time I hear that. Okay, this was started, with Soros money, and I think it's the Pew Research Foundation and so on. All of these, part of this network of groups on the left. Why do they want you to report all your voter registration to them? So that they've got the picture of how to cheat for the whole country.
Yeah.
So they want as many states as possible. So what they've been doing is registering. Because if you get too many Trump supporters show up at a certain district or at a certain place where maybe you don't control, maybe you can't put pizza boxes on the walls and kick out, all the observers and have a water main leak and, and the machines go down. Maybe you don't control all of those external variables, right? So you cannot end up with more votes than registered voters, because then everyone knows you cheated. Right. So right now, the fix is already in for 2024. Then you're going to have all the propaganda and you're going to have the newspapers, just like they did when Trump tried to say they're going to cheat in 2020. They said, Trump's not going to accept the results of the election. Look at him. He's a big dictator. He's going to steal it. He's going to cling to power at any cost. right? They've got that. So they have many pillars to the cheat. Then you have the tech companies are all involved, right? Every single one of them, every search engine out there is involved. Even the so-called independent ones that I use, they're all involved. They push you to the stories they want to push you to. I urge everybody to watch the movie The Creepy Line by Dr. Robert Epstein, who is a Democrat, hates Trump, voted for Hillary. He did a study on how Google determined who would win the election in India years ago. He's done a lot of studies on elections in America. He lives in hiding, that man, okay? Lives and works in hiding because of what he can show. Because by pushing your search results, and don't think that if you search Donald Trump, they're going to give you 20 negative articles. No, they figured it out. They're going to give you, say, they're going to give you maybe 10 positive articles, 8 positive articles, 5 neutral ones, and then they're going to give you like, a couple humdingers, right? The ones that really hurt. Because then you're going to say, oh, well, look, this isn't biased because they're showing me good things about Trump or whatever. Right. They figured out down to a science how to manipulate the search results so that they steer you towards the candidates they want and steer you away from it. Google, in the 2020 election cycle, Dr. Robert Epstein showed that when you logged onto your computer, if you were in a Democratic area, it said the Google thing was logo was manipulated to go vote, right? To say, don't forget to vote or something along those lines. That didn't happen if you're a Republican. So they can isolate down to the individual. That's what all that data is about. All those idiots out there that say, well, I don't care. I like getting a TikTok feed that's tailored to my needs. Or if I don't want to buy this product that they're offering me, I don't have to buy it. What does it matter? It matters because they know who you are. And they're steering you towards the candidate they want. If they know that you're going to vote the way they don't want you to vote, they make sure you don't get any voting reminders. They make it difficult to find where do you go vote in your community, and so on and so on. So I'm not saying this because there's no point in voting in 2024, right? It's the exact opposite. The only way to win in 2024 is to overwhelm the cheat.
And that's
with numbers.
Right. That's what
so many people that you don't let it happen. For those who say there's no evidence of fraud, you're an idiot. Go and look at the evidence of fraud. You really are an idiot. There is so much evidence. Look at Georgia, look at Maricopa County. I mean, it is unbelievable how much. Look at Wisconsin. There is so much evidence that's coming out now. Those judges who refuse to hear most of those cases, they should be disbarred. Right. They have no right setting foot in a courtroom because they're a bunch of cowards. They're an absolute bunch of cowards. The courts are going to let you down. The Supreme Court's going to let you down. Your political leaders are going to let you down. It's on you. It is on you. So make sure that you vote. Don't let anybody tell you that it's not worth it.
Well, with that, we will conclude our discussion. We certainly appreciate you joining us on the Trumpet Daily, and your program can be seen on Truth in Media, I believe you said. And
truthinmedia.com or on X.
Okay.
Or just search Lara Logan and the rest of the story with Lara Logan, or go on my site on Twitter. It's also on Truth Social. Post links on there. And of course, Locals. Locals is a great platform. We are working on building up that ecosystem, and I'm going to get it out on my own website as well.
Lara Logan, it's been great spending some time with you. Thank you
for having me.